Hello, everybody. This is Jimmy. You're reading with Jimmy. Today, we're going to interpret Goethe's Faust, which hopefully you read with me. All the parts. It was a long one. This is part one of the interpretation by yours truly, Jimmy. Ready? Wasn't this a beautiful, scary drama? I know. Some of you were confounded by the language. I get it. However, it's interesting when I told you right up front that I chose this translation because of the language. But can you imagine doing a deal with the devil? What if you don't believe in the devil? Besides, I thought I've been telling you that classical literature is there to see how others lead their lives and how to lead our own. How does that work with a play like Faust? Wait a minute. And didn't Jimmy also say that literature is language charged with meaning? How does that work here? Well, as far as literature charged with meaning, I don't think there's any question that this fits Faust. Say that 5 times. This fits Faust. In fact, it's why Jimmy chose this particular translation by Baynard Taylor. It's the language. Just check out some of the ones that I found so charged. Quote, "What serves not is a sore impediment. The moment's needs create the thing to serve and bless it." There's something almost modern in this, isn't there? Utility driving reality. The moment's need creates the thing to serve and bless it. In other words, what you need, right? That's what you need at the moment. How about another one? That which one does not know, one needs to use. And what one knows, one uses never. Isn't that interesting? That's called an inversion. It's kind of knowledge turned upside down, inside out. Don't you feel like that sometimes, that the world is upside down? Jimmy does. Here's another one. Released from ice are brook and river by the quickening glance of the gracious spring. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that beautiful? It's actually the seasons in language, huh? It's not you wake up and you go, what a beautiful day. That's not that. The quickening glance of the gracious spring. That's beautiful, extraordinary language. Couple more. Take hold then and let reflection rest and plunge into the world with zest. Think about that. Don't quit thinking about it and just do it. It's like Nike, just do it. That nothing can be perfect unto man, I now am conscious. These are quiet statements that undercut everything that follows it. How about this? What must be, let it quickly be. Just get it over with. Did you ever feel like that? What must be, let it quickly be. Surrender. Don't you feel like that sometimes? And there's so many more, which I hope you enjoyed when I was reading with you. As far as learning how others lead their lives and how to lead our own, well, the rest of this interpretation and part 2 of this interpretation will strive to do just that. Show us how Faust lived his life, and from what we watched, how to live our own. That's why I divided this into 2 parts of the interpretation. Very important. Faust, like us, is a complex character. You're not just one way, you're complex. Human beings are complex. You never do things because of one thing. They're not just black and white all the time, are they? Like everything else, let's start at the beginning. Well, not exactly the beginning. The prologue in heaven, that's where this play starts. God and Mephistopheles, the devil, there's talking about the world, and then Faust comes up. There's some archangels there, Raphael, Gabriel, Michael. They're describing the universe, and is presented to us as harmony. Everything is in harmony. Everything works like a clock. And why wouldn't it be? Because it's heaven, right? And remember, this is the third person narrator talking. The narrator is outside the story. Very important. Mephistopheles enters and disrupts the scene. And isn't this just like the devil, disruptor? So Mephistopheles doesn't deny God, or he doesn't attack creation, but his focus is on human beings. And we're going to talk about Mephistopheles in part 2. But basically, he sees humans as unstable creatures who can't live within the order that they've been giving. And isn't that true? Does he have our number or what? Huh? That's what happened since what? Adam and Eve were there, right? They couldn't follow orders. They just, I got to do something else. So God brings up Faust, and God knows Faust is confused. He's searching. He's striving towards something high. He's unsettled. He's just not happy. Strive is really an interesting word. And when you read Genesis on this website with Jimmy, the word strive comes from chapter 6, verse 3. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man. Now, why did I bring up Genesis? Jimmy, I thought you said stay inside the story. I am staying inside the story. The story starts in heaven with God and the devil, right? So Genesis is the Bible, so nothing wrong with looking at the word strive. In any case, Faust is a good man, and he's aware of the right path. And Mephistopheles, I don't think so, Lord. He says Faust can be led astray, and that human striving is not noble. It's not. It's a waste of time. But I can exploit it. He believes Faust can be corrupted through experience. This is one of the keys to the story. So that becomes the heart of the story, and Mephistopheles delivering experiences Faust to gain control of his soul. And God allows Mephistopheles to do this, to test Faust. This is part of the play where people often say they make a bet, but it's really not a bet that they make. In our version, this legend has been reinterpreted hundreds of times across literature. Read my footnotes since the time, right? Key versions include Marlowe's Dr. Faust, which, ladies and gentlemen, we will read a piece of that in part 2. Right? And the book of Job, I'm going to read this footnote because I'm going to read that in a second. Job was a righteous man who loses everything in a test permitted by God. That's the book of Job in the Bible. Very important. These are allusions, right? So, in any case, it's really not a bet. God just says, okay, you can try to corrupt Faust, whatever. So he grants permission. Some say it echoes the book of Job. And remember that from your study, when we studied the book of Job? He was tested. He was really, oh my God. And if you read that, the third person narrator tells you that in the first sentence, Job was a good man. So then you're asking yourself for the rest of that story, why is all this junk happening to this guy? Don't you feel like that sometimes? Why is God doing this to me? Well, here's a flash. God's not doing it. We'll talk about this. Anyway, this is a story about striving, never giving up. But the question to ask yourself is, here's very important, what are you striving for? What are you striving for? Think about this. If thou do it, here's another quote from the Bible. Well, Jimmy, why do you keep bringing in the Bible? Well, this play started in heaven, right? And if you want to understand it, you stay inside the text, and you got to try to understand the word striving. So what is striving? You're trying. Oh, it's trying hard, right? What are you trying hard for? I want to be the best I can be, Jimmy. Good. If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted. And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door. This is probably one of the most important quotes and references you can have, not just for understanding Faust, but for understanding yourself. So, this story does not start on the earth, does it? It starts with a question about what human life is allowed to become. Evolution, becoming, striving. So, Let's start on Act 1, and the scene is a lofty, arched, narrow, Gothic chamber. A lofty, arched, narrow, Gothic chamber. Kind of like my vision here, right? Okay, good. So, Act 1. Faust is in a chair at his desk. He's restless when he starts to talk. Narration. Jimmy loves to bring in narration because it's important to understanding classical literature, to understanding life, as you'll see if you haven't figured that out already by reading with me. This is a drama, so it's third-person narration. What does that mean? Well, that means the narrator is outside the story. It's not inside. It's not Faust telling it. It's not God telling it. It's not Mephistopheles telling it. It's not Margaret telling it. It's a third-person anonymous narrator. The asides are when the characters talk directly to the audience, but for the most part, this is filtered third-person narration. And with third-person narration, unlike a person inside the story who could be lying to us, we have to believe the narrator, always. We cannot doubt the third-person narrator. If we do, none of the story will make sense. So we have to believe that narrator. In other words, when we hear Faust talk, it's the third-person narrator telling us what he says. It's like when you go there and you say, oh, Tom said this about you. And you're hearing it from a third-person narrator, not Tom himself, you see? So even if we dial back to the prelude, we can actually see the third person in action. Here's the manager saying, you two who oft a helping hand. These are the people in the prelude. The narrator is reporting what these characters are saying to each other. In Act 1, we meet Faust. Immediately with the word I've in the first line. Okay? We're going to read that line in a moment, but that's Faust. The question you, ladies and gentlemen, have to ask yourself, who is Faust talking to? There's no one else in the room that I can tell. You could say he's talking to the audience, or he's actually talking, just talking. He's talking to himself and to us, the audience. And we're hearing it through the third-person narrator's narrative. We learn about him through his speech. Ladies and gentlemen, isn't that how you learn about people? Through their actions, through their speech. You understand? And that's important in drama. Let's pause for a moment, see what Aristotle says about drama. Can we do that? Aristotle says character in tragedy, plot is the most important, but character is the second most important component after plot. He argued, why am I telling you about Aristotle? Because I do when we talk about anything in classical literature. Aristotle was one smart guy, and he actually talked about it in his Poetics, about what is. He classified things. Very sharp thinker. The best that Jimmy could find so far. Right? Second most important thing is character. Characters should be believable. So stop there for a moment and ask yourself, did you believe these characters? Well, Jimmy, I just don't believe in the devil. Well, that's okay. You don't have to. What did I tell you about reading classical literature? Stay in the story. Forget what's on your blackboard. Forget what you think. Just stay in the story. Did you find these people believable? Did you think people would act like this? I think you're going to have to say yes, because Faust is very human. The devil, well, he's the devil. You may not believe in the devil, but if you believe in good and evil, and if the theory of opposites dictates you can't have good without evil, he's an interesting character, isn't he? Their attributes should conform to what would be expected from similar people in real life. Well, Jimmy, the devil's not real. Well, that's okay. Put your beliefs aside and ask yourself if people like Faust exist. Do you think there are people who are just never satisfied? I'm waiting. Jimmy at Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com. Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com. That's my email. Of course there are. You're like that sometimes. You're never satisfied, are you? You're never I'm just never satisfied. Don't forget, that's what this is all about, this play. Are you ever satisfied? Because that's the deal he makes with the devil, which we'll talk about. He also believed, Aristotle, that the best tragedies have a balance between good and evil. Hello! Isn't that? There's a beautiful balance here. You got the devil and you got a human being, right? God's there. He's a good, right? And before you say I'm violating my rule by going outside the story and talking about Aristotle, I'm not. I reference Aristotle to help us understand the story. Aristotle's not interpreting this. He's just saying a few rules that characters should be believable, and they are. That's why this is a classical piece of literature. It's not like a dime novel. It's not like some of those other novels you read. They're the one-and-done novels. You know what I'm talking about. The Jack Reachers of the world. You read the Jack Reacher, and I'm not saying they're bad books. I'm just saying they're not classical literature. You don't have to go back and reread Jack Reacher. You do have to go back and reread Faust by Goethe. Yeah, I'm just telling you, you'll get more out of it when you read it again with me. Anyway, Aristotle never read Faust, but Aristotle studied drama, and he classified it, which is why in most of my interpretations, you're going to find references to Aristotle. And I would encourage you to read Aristotle. I think maybe we'll do that on this website. Anyway, Aristotle believed that moral character is determined by the structure of individual acts. What does that mean? Well, if the character is good or bad, depends on what they do and how they fit together in the story. So we see Faust doing acts. He makes a deal with the devil. That's an act, right? And he goes through a bunch of experiences throughout the whole play. Those are acts. And he talks a lot, right? And they have to be consistent with justice, friendship, etc. And Faust acts, Mephistopheles acts, Margaret acts. Margaret does a lot of interesting things. So morality, what is morality? It's a system of principles, values, and codes. And well, I don't have morale. I'm not a moral person, Jimmy. Well, that's okay. Forget that you are not a moral person for this book. Stay in the classical literature, inside the text, and just let's read what this is. I'm not saying you're immoral. I'm just saying right and wrong do exist. They have to exist. Morality has to be here. Otherwise, we would just be bad people all the time, wouldn't we? It's so easy to be bad. Considering that the play started out in heaven with God and Mephistopheles discussing, I would respectfully suggest this is a drama about good and evil. Underneath everything, good and evil. It's what any conflict is about, good and evil. Every piece of classical literature on my website has an underlying theme of good and evil. Your life has an underlying thread of good and evil. And it's hard to be good, isn't it? It's easy to be evil, I think. Well, anyway, I don't want to make an editorial judgment. So it's important to note Aristotle also believed virtue existed in a spectrum, you know what a spectrum is, of deficiency and excess. This is kind of like what he always used to talk about, the golden mean. What does that mean? Well, the golden mean is like right in the middle. You're not too far this way. You're not too far that way. You're right in the middle. That's where people will be happy. Aristotle believed in balance. Did you see balance in here? I saw a lot of swaying up and back, right? So what do you think Faust's deficiencies were? What do you think his excesses were? This is something we're going to discuss in this analysis. And finally, character and action. Aristotle said characters cannot act without a reference to the situation in which they are placed. You've seen this in movies sometimes. I just watched a movie the other day, last night. And the movie was horrible because it didn't have any kind of reference to the situation they were placed. There was no motivation. There was no character development. And basically, I started doing other things on my second screen while we were watching the movie. It was stupid. Characters it would be like you doing something that's not referenced to where you're placed in. Nutty people do that, don't they? Right? If you were in a room without windows falling in space, you'd never know you're falling. You would not have a reference point. Well, Jimmy, why are you bringing that up? Think about it. You're in a room, no windows, you're falling in space. You won't know you're falling because you have no reference point. You need a reference point to determine motion. You need a reference point to determine anything. You need a reference point. You can't know what good is unless you know what bad is, and then you have a reference point. So he's saying the actions of these characters in a drama have to reference the situation they're in. Otherwise, it makes no sense, right? So Faust is being placed in a different situation than, let's say, Jack London character was, the man in the Yukon territory. It's a different situation. Faust is in a Gothic chamber complaining how unhappy he is. Jack London's guy is in the wilderness trying to make it to camp, walking, alone. And he's just reacting to his situation. You react to your situations, don't you? So being in a specific situation helps us understand the actions of the characters. You often think to yourself, well, example, you see something on television in the news or something. What would you do in that situation? What would you do in that situation? Don't you say that to yourself? What would I do in that situation? You're always wondering, what would you do? Well, that's the same thing that drama is all about. What would you do in this situation? You're unhappy. So finally, you can read all this and pause me if you like. Right? When we analyze Faust, because this is about his character. Let's face it, we're analyzing Faust. He's the key guy. The name of the play is Faust. The guy starts talking, he's Faust. So character development, people are complex. We talked about that. So this is about understanding a person. And why this is important is because you can't understand people in real life. They don't have glass heads. They don't always tell you the truth, correct? It's very hard. Sometimes you don't even understand yourself, do you? Did you ever say to yourself, why the hell did I do that? Right? Why? People are complex. So, personality traits, emotions, values, goals, that's what this is about. Understanding one person, Faust. And we're going to explore the complexity of the characters throughout this interpretation. Let's go with Faust. What's he saying, right? First 3 lines, pay attention. Quote, I've studied now philosophy and jurisprudence, medicine, and even, alas, theology. I'll read that again. I've studied now philosophy and jurisprudence, medicine, hyphen, and even, alas, exclamation point, theology, hyphen. So I'm going to stop there for a minute. And before you say, why do you stop all the time in your interpretation? Can't you just interpret, Jimmy? I'm going to answer you because the beginning of anything is almost always the most important thing. The beginning of anything, especially in classical literature. The opening lines, the first words, the sentences, the paragraphs, the pages. It sets the tone that's reflected throughout the piece. That's why I spent a lot of time in the openings. Classical literature has been crafted to do just that. So the study of the beginning and giving it time will always help our understanding of the entire book, drama, short story that we're reading. Let me show you by asking you a question. Ready? Look at those 3 lines again. I've studied now philosophy and jurisprudence, medicine, and even alas, theology. The question I want to ask you is, what is the most interesting word you see in those 3 lines? What? Go ahead. What is it? Think about it. All right. Jimmy thinks the most important word, don't laugh, is alas. Alas. I've studied now philosophy and jurisprudence, medicine, and even, alas, theology. There's a lot of big words in there, right? We know he's narrating it, Faust is. And why is alas? What do you think alas means? Alas. What do you think that means, that word? Do you know what it means? Maybe the most famous alas is Hamlet when he uncovers Yorick's skull. By the way, Hamlet is on my website and YouTube channel. Please read it with me. When Hamlet picks up the skull, he's holding a skull in his hand, and he says, alas, poor Yorick, I knew him, Horatio, a fellow of infinite jest, of most excellent fancy. Alas, poor Yorick. Alas is an interjection. Parts of speech are very important. It's an interjection. You can say this, alas. You can say it too when you walk outside and it's raining. Alas, it's raining. It's an interjection used to express sadness or regret or pity. Alas, right? We study words in classical literature because words have meaning. I promised you when I started this website, we're going to look at these words. Words are important, ladies and gentlemen. They're important for many reasons. They're important because they mean things. Well, they don't mean anything, Jimmy. They're just representations of reality. Great. You can believe that. But words mean something. You say the wrong word to somebody, they get angry. You know, words, intangible words, love, hate, those are words, right? Parts of speech become really important. What do you know the 8 parts of speech? Just read Alice's Adventures in Wonderland on my website and YouTube channel. Nouns, pronouns, verbs, they are all important, and unless you understand what I mean by words, the words I use, you're not going to understand anything, right? That's what communication all is about. We have to agree on our definitions. So in this case, alas is an interjection. And actually in both cases, it's an interjection. It's interjection. So Faust is expressing sadness, pity, and disappointment with theology. Alas, even with theology, he got nothing out of it. Right? I've studied this and that, and alas, theology. Even theology didn't help me. You see what I'm saying? So imagine him saying instead, and even theology was disappointing. Yuck. If you take the word alas out of there, right? I've studied now philosophy and jurisprudence, medicine, and even theology. You see what alas does to that? Charges it with meaning. You still have to define your words because definitions change over time, which is why Jimmy gives you definitions of some of the words when we're reading these words together. So why is Faust saying alas before theology? Besides parts of speech, punctuation is important in reading classical literature. I know when you're reading dime novels, you don't really think about punctuation. But when you read classical literature, every piece of punctuation means something. The writer, who's behind all of this, is doing this for a reason, to help your cadence, to help your reading. And every word, every punctuation mark means something when it's classical literature. That's why we're doing classical literature. Writers never waste words or marks. I'm telling you. You've been reading a lot. I've got over 300, 400 hours already, and I think I've proved that to you. Anyway, in the first few lines, look at the dashes that are used here. A dash is a mark longer than a hyphen, and it signifies a strong pause, interruption, abrupt change. I've studied now philosophy and jurisprudence, medicine, and alas, theology. You see that? There's that pause. This is why I picked Bernard Taylor's translation. It's remarkable in its rhythm. Okay? Note the exclamation point after alas. He stuck an exclamation point in there. What's that for? It's to signify strong emotion. And alas. He doesn't say alas. Now, when you're reading in your mind, I've studied philosophy, you're reading quickly, that's not the way to read this book, this play. It's not the way to do that. I've studied now philosophy and jurisprudence, pause, medicine, pause, dash, and even alas, theology. You see what I'm saying? Well, Jimmy, how often are you going to repeat this? Until I help you understand the beauty of the language, right? Isn't that exactly what you're doing in this sentence? Think about it. Can you feel his emotion? And what is he feeling? Let's finish the first few lines together. I've studied now philosophy and jurisprudence, medicine, and even the last theology, from end to end, with labor keen. And here, poor fool, with all my lore, I stand no wiser than before. I'm magister, yea, doctor, height and straight and crosswise wrong or right. These 10 years long, with many woes, I've led my scholars by the nose, and I see that nothing can be known. He's feeling despair. You know what despair is, pretty much? Wouldn't you say that? What do you feel? What do you think if you've ever felt despair or sad? What do you think? I'm sad. I don't know what you think if you're sad, but this is what Faust thinks when he's sad. And that's important because I told you that's how we can see in classical literature how other people are thinking about things. This guy is very sad. He's in despair. Don't forget later on in this chapter, in this act, he tries to kill himself. He's so sad. And if you think that that's not common, look at the statistics. Look at statistics today about suicide. What do you think drives people to suicide? This is very important. It's horrible. They should talk to Jimmy. I talk him out of it. You don't want to do that. For 10 years, Faust has devoted himself 10 years to everything from end to end, not just labor, with keen labor. He wasn't just struggling, studying, keen labor. Do you know what keen? Note the flip of the adjective. With labor keen, right? Isn't that what he says? With labor keen. Instead of keen labor. Look how beautiful that is. He just flipped it. Got it? The dashes he uses, his conclusion is that he's no wiser than before. I don't know anything. I've studied for 10 years and I don't know anything. Can you think of a more depressing kind of state to be in? What would you do if you devoted 10 years to something and you felt that you haven't even moved an inch toward your goal? Look at his conclusion. Nothing can be known. I can't know anything. Can you imagine feeling like that? I can't know anything. Where you feel you can't figure anything out. I would imagine many people feel like this, who are pursuing something, and after studying it, they realize they can't figure it out. How frustrating that is. You're trying to figure out a disease or something like that, right? You're trying to figure out why your body cannot be pushed to a further limit when you're accelerating in a sport. When that happens to you, what do you do? What do you do? What does Faust do? Before I answer that question, let me point out one more thing. Don't give up. Stick with me on this. Well, let me point out two more things. I feel like Columbo sometimes. One more thing. Faust calls himself a poor fool. Why is that? You poor fool. Well, because with all of his lore, he's no wiser. What is lore? You see why words are important, definitions are? Well, Jimmy, nobody talks like this anymore. Well, of course they don't. Why? Because they don't read classical literature. Lore is it's a common word if you read classical literature. It's traditional knowledge. It's the knowledge you possess in your own mind about your youth, about when Jimmy was born in the 60s. There's a lot of lore about the 60s. Anecdotes, stories on the subject, passed down orally or as a backstory. And you've heard the famous line with the word lore, right? Or have you? Can I share that famous line with you? Quote, "Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore." You know that line? Do you know that line? I'm going to tell you what that line is, right? That's Edgar Allan Poe from, quote, "The Raven, Nevermore." Well, Jimmy, you're going outside the story again. Of course I am, to help you understand what's inside the story. Remember the theory of opposites. In interpretation, you have to go outside to understand the inside. You can't know what's inside unless you go outside. And I'm not going outside, I'm staying within the text of the story. He's the guy, Faust is the guy who used the word lore. I didn't use it, he did. And if I want to understand what he means by it, I got to understand that word means. Now, I could look it up in Google. Google can tell me what lore means, which I just told you, it's traditional knowledge. But it's deeper, it's richer, it's language charged with meaning. And if you've never read The Raven, you wouldn't know that the word lore is there, would you? Anyway, I'm just adding that to help you appreciate the language. Faust is in despair. I want to finish the paragraph. May I? Quote, "And see that nothing can be known. That knowledge cuts me to the bone." Notice when I'm reading that, I've highlighted some of these words because we're going to talk about them. I'm cleverer, true, than those fops of teachers, doctors and magisters and scribes and preachers. And neither scruples nor doubts come now to smite me, nor hell nor devil can longer affright me. You see what he's saying there? I can't, nothing's going to hurt me, and nothing's going to make me afraid. For this, all pleasure am I foregoing. I do not pretend to aught worth knowing, and I do not pretend that I could be a teacher, to help or convert a fellow creature. Well, then, too, I've neither lands nor gold, nor the world's least pomp or honor hold, and no dog would endure such a crust existence. So he's not rich. He's not claiming to be able to teach anybody. This guy is really screwed up. Would you agree with that? You know anybody like this? Cut to the bone means to reduce something to the absolute minimum or lowest possible level. Extreme, often painful reduction. Cut it to the bone. A lot of times, procurement people say, cut that budget to the bone. Cut it to the bone. Most essential elements only, right? We only want the facts, ladies and gentlemen. It can only mean to affect someone deeply. What cuts Faust to the bone? That knowledge. What knowledge cuts him to the bone? That nothing can be known. Nothing, I can't know anything. Cuts him to the bone. The knowledge that nothing can be known. Smite, where he uses smite, nor doubts come now to smite me. Scruples or doubts do not smite him. What's smite? Strike someone or something with a heavy forceful blow. Smite you. It implies delivering divine punishment. It's used in Genesis. There's a footnote that I give you. Noah built an altar to the Lord and took every blah, 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 blah. And I will again smite any more everything living thing as I have done. Neither will I again smite. That's where God, after he floods everybody, he says, I will not do that again. I will not smite them again. Faust is saying he's smart enough not to be smitten. And he can't be scared of hell or devil. And I want you to note the pronoun this. See the word this? For this, all pleasure am I foregoing. For this. What is this? This is a pronoun. It's called a demonstrative pronoun. What does that mean? Well, demonstrative pronouns they point. They're a pointing word. This, that, right? This. They demonstrate or point to something. In this case, this is everything Faust has been doing in his studies for 10 years. This. That one little word, this. Holy mackerel, it's charged with meaning. This. What does he say? For this, all pleasure am I foregoing. What's this? Everything. All of his study for this. 10 years of work in one word. Whew. Right? And next, he repeats the word pretend twice. He doesn't pretend there is anything worth knowing or that he could be a teacher. All of this is adding to the feeling of despair that he's experiencing. And then, in the last line, note the word dog. No dog would endure such a crust existence. No dog. What's that? Dog. No dog. Oh, dog. Don't treat me like a dog, right? Dog. It's actually foreshadowing. You know what foreshadowing is? It's a hint of things to come. You know what happens in the story if you read it with me. Don't you remember how the devil first shows up? As a dog, a big poodle. Remember that? So, Faust is saying hell or devil no longer frightens him. Now that you read Faust with me, when you read that line, do you see how it's charged with meaning? No dog would endure. Well, dog. He's a dog. Right? The dog, of course, is how Mephistopheles appears. And if you remember, Faust was never, ever, ever afraid of Mephistopheles. Was he? Think about that. Think about that. And ask yourself, why was not he afraid of the devil? Because he already told you, he's studied everything. So, his first speech paints this picture of a guy in despair. He's just, oh my, what is despair? What causes his despair? His inability to know anything. I just can't know anything. This is very important to understanding what anything means. Quote, wherefore from magic I seek assistance. There it is, ladies and gentlemen. So I can't know anything through study. I turn to magic. That many a secret perchance I reach through the spirit power and spirit speech, and thus the bitter task forego of saying the things that I do not know, that I may detect the inmost force which binds the world and guides its course, its germs, productive powers explore, and rummage in empty words no more. This is the key to the puzzle. Now we have it. Faust wants to know, quote, the inmost force which binds the world and guides its course. That's it. That's what he's after. That's what he does. He just can't seem to get that. The inmost force that binds the world and guides its course. Don't forget that. Don't forget that. That's the key to this story. His goal, I got to understand. I don't understand anything, but I want to understand the inmost force which binds the world. Is that what you want to do? Or do you care about the next game on television? Basketball game, football game? You see what I'm saying? I'm not saying there's no place for sports. I'm just saying, I want to understand the inmost force which binds the world and guides its course. That's a hell of a goal. That's a hell of a goal. How's he going to do that? Magic. Magic. Google says magic is the alleged art of supernatural power to influence forces, events, people through rituals, charms. Synonyms include sorcery, witchcraft, enchantment, illusion. That's what gives words so... That's why words have so much difficulty. Think about that. Conjuring, that has a different meaning than sorcery, or does it? Right? Witchcraft. These are all words that theoretically Google's saying mean magic. Well, they mean more than magic. Magic is different than illusion, than conjuring. Isn't it? They're not even spelled alike. They don't use the same letters. It's like die or die. D-Y-E, D-I-E. You pronounce it the same way, but they have different meanings. Or there, T-H-E-R-E, T-H-E-I-R, or T-H-Y'-R-E. There, or there. You see what I'm saying? Very confusing, and that's why that's why you read classical literature and pay attention to words. So now we have a really smart guy turning to the supernatural, to magic, to find out what he wants to know. How things work in the world, the inmost force that binds the world. Can anyone really know that? Do you think, ladies and gentlemen, that anyone can know the inmost force that binds the world? And if you answer no, well, then you can see why he turned to magic. And if you answer yes, the question will be, how do you turn to magic? Is that really what he's asking for, the inmost force? Keep the words in mind. What is the inmost force? And then he talks about the moon. He calls the moon a mournful friend. Did you ever call the moon my mournful friend? Isn't that beautiful? So if you're sad and it's night and there's a full moon, you can now look at the full moon and say, oh, my mournful friend. It's beautiful. Nobody talks like that. Of course they don't. Or do they? Or do they? He calls him my mournful friend, the moon, and how the moon watched him so many days at his desk. Does the moon watch anybody? If you can't appreciate this, you might as well just stop this analysis and go on to something else on my website or whatever. This is beautiful language. That's why I chose this translation. The moon watched him many days at his death. He speculates if he would stand on the mountains under moonlight and he would be freed from the fumes of lore that swathe me, that it would be a great experience if I was just free. Remember the astronauts that just came back from being, going around the moon, and what they said about they looked at the earth, they had almost a mystical, religious experience doing that. You remember that? The word lore comes up again. Swath is a verb meaning to wrap or bind. In other words, lore is tangling him up. All of this knowledge is just tangling him up. And he keeps talking. Ah, me, this dungeon, still I see this dreary accursed masonry, and even the welcome daylight strains but duskily through the painted panes. Isn't this beautiful? You can pause me and read this yourself out loud. Hemmed in by many a toppling heap of books, worm-eaten, gray with dust, which to the vaulted ceiling creep, against the smoky paper thrust, with glasses and boxes around. Remember, language charged with meaning, he's painting a picture in your imagination. Can you feel the room he's in? That's what this language is doing to you. It's supposed to make you feel. That's what all great classical literature is designed to do. To make you feel something. He feels crushed and hemmed in. He's suffocating. And he keeps on talking. I won't read it all. You can pause me and read it yourself. And do I ask wherefore my heart falters, oppressed with unknown needs? Why some inexplicable smart all movement of my life impedes, alas. There's that alas again, see it? You see it? And then he brings up Nostradamus. From Nostradamus's very hand, is it not sufficient company? In other words, if I just have Nostradamus's book, isn't that enough? He opens up the book and perceives the sign of the macrocosm. And before we look at what he looked at, I want you to note the alas again. See it? And also Nostradamus. When I was reading this with you, when we read it together, I gave you information about this guy named Nostradamus. And this guy was, right? Nostradamus was a French physician, apothecary, astrologer who became world famous for his book, Les Prophéties. And this is a book that Faust has. He has this book. So I'm telling you what that book is in order to help you appreciate what Faust has. And one of the predictions of Nostradamus was credited. He's credited with making predictions. I'm not going to belabor it. You can read my footnote here about the death of King Henry. That's, everybody talks about Nostradamus. There's specials about Nostradamus. I don't know. I'm not saying you should believe it or not. I'm just saying Faust has this book. And if you know what the book is, you'll know what he's looking at. And the page he's looking at is worth looking at. And by the way, I've received emails about this when I was reading it with you. Based on the search results and historical context of Nostradamus, there is no single page entitled Macrocosm in his book. There's no single page titled that, because I'm going to try to tell you what he's looking at, and I've already sent emails to me that's saying there's no such thing. Well, Jimmy says, so what? What do I care? There's no such thing. We're in this book. And if the narrator, third-person narrator, says Faust is looking at this thing called the macrocosm, and it's not in Nostradamus's book, but the narrator says it is in Nostradamus's book, who do you believe? And how do you know it's not in Nostradamus's book when Faust was doing that? How do you know that? How can you know that? Our story says he opens up the book and he perceives the sign. If you're going to believe this story, the third-person narrator, that is what Faust is looking at. You understand? So stay in the story. And here's a picture of what he's looking at. Check it out. Jimmy found it. The concept of the macrocosm in Nostradamus' writing is represented by an intricate web connecting 7 planets to earthly events. He views the universe as an animate being where the movements of stars, right, particularly Saturn and Mars, dictate plague, war, political shift. You've heard of the 4 horsemen of apocalypse. I'm really getting, outside the story now. But I want you to see and use your imagination that this is what Faust is looking at. So what do you see when you look at this page? Right? I see astrology signs. You see it? Pisces, Capricorn. Well, Jimmy, I don't believe in astrology. You don't have to. But I want you to understand what he's looking at. That's what he's looking at. Some people believe in that. Some people still believe in that. I see a moon, which Faust talked about already. Do you see it in there? So, remember, Faust turned to magic in order to understand the world. And he keeps talking and he keeps opening up the book. And he says again, he says, quote, what a sudden rapture leaps from this. Think about this. This guy's been depressed and now he's using the word rapture. Rapture. Remember that Blondie song, Rapture? What a great song. A sudden rapture leaps from this I view. Through all my senses swiftly flowing. I feel a youthful, holy, vital bliss. In every vein and fiber new. Was it a God who traced this sign? With calm across my tumult ceiling, my troubled heart to joy? You see what he's saying? He goes, am I a God? So clear are my, he's just so excited now looking at this page. He's impressed by the page. Wouldn't you agree with that? So he contemplates the sign, right? And he keeps talking. He keeps talking. How each of the whole its substance gives, each in other works and lives. Like heavenly forces rising and descending, their golden urns reciprocally lending. And he goes, a show alone, thee, boundless nature, how make thee my own? You see, how can I make you my own? And then the play tells us that he turns the leaves, pages, impatiently. He's turning the pages impatiently. He's slapping, he's flipping pages. And he comes upon the sign of the earth spirit. And of course, he keeps talking. How otherwise upon me works this sign, this thou, earth spirit of the earth, art nearer. And though the shock of storms may smite me, no crash shipwreck shall ever have the power to fright me. There he is again saying, I'm not afraid of anything. And then suddenly he says, I feel thy presence, spirit, that I invoke. Reveal thyself. In my heart, what rendering stroke with new impulsion my senses. And so he invokes the earth spirit. And there it is. I found the earth spirit for you. Can you imagine being confronted with this? Holy moly. Look at this thing. That's what he's looking at. The earth. He's invoking the earth spirit. What's he up to? So from studying everything, we turn to magic, and now he's invoking demons, right? 800 words. And don't we get a sense of this guy and how really confused he is, despairing, and he gets excited now because he seizes the book and pronounces the sign of the spirit. This is what the narrator tells us he does. And a ruddy flame flashes and the spirit appears in the flame. Imagine that. You invoke the spirit and suddenly you're looking at the spirit you just invoked. He conjures up the spirit. And Faust can't face the spirit. So the spirit talks to Faust. Faust, I can't look at it. Finishing with, quote, where art thou, Faust, whose voice has pierced to me, who towards me pressed with all your energy, he art thou, who my presence breathing seeing, trembles through all the depths of being, a withering worm, a terror-stricken form. Faust says that he's the spirit's peer. Shut up, spirit, I'm your equal, I'm your peer. And then, before the spirit vanishes, the spirit says, thou art like the spirit which thou comprehendest, not me. You're nowhere near me. In other words, Faust are like the spirit which you understand, not me. You don't really understand me. So Faust, you only understand yourself. You cannot possibly understand me. You don't even understand yourself, actually. So Faust reacts, not thee? Well, who then? I? Image of the Godhead, not even like thee? And the scene is broken up by Wagner, whose student, who comes in. So he's conjured up this spirit, the earth spirit. They have a little dialogue. He's afraid. Aren't you moved, impressed, confused? Or did you just brush this off and say, well, I'd rather read a dime novel? You see what I'm talking about? Have you ever felt like this? I'm not saying you conjured up spirits. But I want to touch again on Aristotle and the plot. I'm not going to belabor this. We're going to save this for the next interpretation. But plot is the representation of human action. And I would say, for a guy in his study, talking to you, we've had a lot of action so far, right? We found out how depressed he is. He's a complex character. The plot will have a beginning and a middle and an end. I'm going to stop there. Learn more about Faust by reading with Jimmy and enjoying part 2 of our analysis. I promise you, one more interpretation, and we're going to figure out this guy Faust. And I'm going to help you understand him in order to understand your own life, because I want you to think about this. He's after something. Are you after something, or are you just happy? Are you just happy? He's after something. He's after understanding the inmost thing that binds the world. That's what he wants to know. What is the inmost thing what is the secret of the world? What is the one thing that brings and some of you are going to already say, well, I could have told him that. I could have told him that. It's God. No. You can't say that. He studied everything, including theology, and he's already said nothing. He can't know anything. But that's the thing he wants to know. What is the inmost thing that binds the world? And maybe you're not interested in that. Maybe, like I said, you're just interested in your paycheck to paycheck, in providing for your family, which is all well and good. That's all well and good, to be striving for that, to strive. He's striving. He's so striving that he's living inside his head. He's inside his head a lot. And he can't know anything. He's realized he's a thinker, ladies and gentlemen. He's not necessarily a doer yet, although he's pretty good at conjuring up images, right? I'm also on YouTube. Be sure to visit and read other classics on my website. I got hundreds of hours, classical literature. But stick with me on this interpretation and read part 2 with me, please. All right. Thanks for coming by. Have a great day. And thanks for listening. I think you'll get something out of this. Bye-bye.